Good morning and welcome you all to the second lecture of International Finance BFC 3240. Today we'll be talking about an important topic, international monetary system. So we often talk about exchange rate, right? Exchange rate means the trading price of two currencies. Okay. So if you want to buy US dollar, how much you have to pay in terms of Australian dollar. Okay. So this is exchange rate. You know. So how is exchange rate determined? What are the institutions that play a vital role in determining exchange rates? So these are and what are the impact of changing interest rates and so on. So these are the subject matters that are covered in international monetary system. Okay, so uh, broadly speaking, the international monetary system refers to the operating system that regulates the valuation and exchange of money across countries. Okay? It influences cross-border payments, it determines exchange rates, and it influences the mobility of capital from one country to another. And the participants are financial institutions like banks, including the central banks. Okay, remember, central banks play a very important role in the international monetary system. Okay, then multinational corporations, of course, because they are the key players in the transaction of capital and finished goods from one country to another country. We discussed about the comparative advantages that multinational corporations have in, in cross-border trading. So they are key players and also investors, including the speculators. We'll talk about them. And when we'll be talking about the international monetary system, we'll frequently use these terms like monetary policy, which are determined by the central banks, exchange rate, foreign exchange market. We'll talk about the so-called gold standard, inflation targeting, and the International Monetary Fund. So we'll be introducing these topics or these terms or these institutions whenever required. With this, I want to discuss the learning objectives of today's class. So today uh, we'll explore the international monetary system. We'll go through the brief history of international monetary system. We'll talk about the so-called gold standard. Starting from the so-called gold standard, we'll come up to the point. We'll talk about the two major exchange rate mechanisms, fixed rate and floating rate. Okay, we'll talk about the costs and benefits of the two exchange rate regimes, why countries or why economies or why central banks prefer one regime versus another regime. We'll talk about these things. Next, we'll talk about the so-called impossible trinity. Okay, I hope you can follow my pointer. So the next learning objective is to learn about the so-called impossible trinity or the trilemma. Okay, so every country faces a choice among these three: flexible exchange rate, independent monetary policy, and freedom of capital movement. And as we will learn that a country can achieve maximum two of these three goals. It cannot achieve all the three goals at the same time. And this is the so-called impossible trinity. We'll talk about that. And finally, we'll briefly talk about the euro. Okay, that is, euro is a unique feature in the history of international monetary system. Okay, we'll talk about the euro, how it emerged, and how each country participate in the European Union, from the European Union, uh, in this in this monetary system. Okay, but we will briefly talk about the euro. Okay, so these are the four learning objectives.